King and others argued that the movement had to be carefully managed in order to help the Kennedys pass the civil rights and voting rights bills. Many of the younger activists pushed for increasingly radical action.
It's essential in movements for real political change to have a degree of diversity. While I do have a great deal of sympathy for Malcolm X's and Stokely Carmichael's assessment, I don't disagree, but I also don't think that a radical wing of a movement and a more liberal wing of a movement need to be mutually exclusive.
And some argue that Martin Luther King was more radical than history often cares to remember. He publicly opposed the Vietnam War and called the US government the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today.
Civil rights leader Martin Luther King leads the procession to the United Nations, where he urges UN pressure to force the US to stop bombing North Vietnam.
On the day of the march, around 5,000 army personnel were deployed to the streets of Washington.
The other things that the civil rights marchers were up against were agents provocateurs, people who were placed there to infiltrate the March on Washington in order to create some evidence to support myths about what happens when you get hundreds of thousands of black people together. I mean, of course, it's going to be a riot because clearly these people don't know how to control themselves, and this is something which proves that they can't handle the freedom that they're marching for. Or, sort of their freedoms are being curtailed because of their bad behavior.
People came from all across the United States to be in Washington that day. Those who took part spoke of a sense of unity, purpose and hope as 300,000 people joined together in common cause.
I stood up, I went straight to the podium, I looked to my right, and I saw hundreds and thousands of young men and women, young volunteers who have been working in the American South. Then I looked to my left, I saw the people in the trees. Then I looked straight ahead, and I said to myself, this is it. I must go for it. I must go for it. I must do my best. I just kept saying it to myself. And I tried to do my best.
At the end of the march, Martin Luther King stood on the stairs of the Lincoln Memorial and gave his iconic "I Have a Dream" speech.
I think that the "I Have a Dream" speech gives us something against which to question the idea of the American dream. So now these two different dreams are kind of sitting side by side, and we need to compare them. I mean, why is it that Martin Luther King needed to assert a dream when this other dream already exists, which should, in theory, provide the freedom and equality to everyone, but actually de facto really doesn't.
In 2013, Americans witnessed the acquittal of the killer of Trayvon Martin, an unarmed black teenager shot dead whilst walking home from a convenience store. Many have drawn parallels between this case and the murder of Emmett Till, a 14-year-old black boy killed in 1955, essentially for being black. His killers were also acquitted.
Both young men, both boys, were killed by people who felt perfectly justified in their actions. And in many ways, the state legitimized them. Till's murderers were not brought to justice for several decades, and we'll see if George Zimmerman ever is held to account for what he did.
a kind of perfect storm of violence. That is to say, young boy walking home in his neighborhood, unarmed, attending to his business. Security guard assumes he's not in his neighborhood. He was in his neighborhood. Security guard sees him and ends up being in a confrontation and kills him, and then walks away, describing to police why he had to kill him. And they accepted that. And when that finally eked out some weeks later, as a matter of fact, that is when we marched and got Zimmerman in the court process. And even in that process, based upon stand your ground laws, in fact, he walked free. And so it was the ugliness, the injustice around it that made Trayvon become a symbol to the whole world of a vulnerable, unarmed young black man being profiled, arrested, shot, and or killed. And that process continues because the profiling is not over. And New York City Mayor Bloomberg attempts to justify race profiling as well as fighting crime. In fact, it is a way of humiliating, and we must fight race profiling.
In the UK, racism is also still a serious problem.
State-sanctioned violence, such as deaths in police custody, where the police involved are never properly made to take responsibility for their actions, legitimizes this violence. And then, of course, it's somehow not seen as violence because the person must have already done something wrong to be in police custody. So yeah, these things are sophisticated forms of control and ways to sort of get around legal structures that are kind of serve the perverse purpose of being able to say, no, actually, if you look at the statute books, they say this, this, and this.
In the UK, for example, women have affirmative action, but blacks don't in this country. So you have 5,000 freshmen at Oxford last year, one Brit, African Brit, 1 out of 5,000. That's disgraceful. Or you look at your police force and fireman's force and teachers force, we're basically locked out because those jobs are perpetuated through family and contacts and relationships. So we must fight for laws that open up doors to let us in.
Those who campaign for justice and equality say that the scale of the struggle ahead is as big as ever.
So the struggle is an ongoing struggle. It was a fight 50 years ago, and it's still a fight 50 years later. Many people are not able to register and to vote. We had elected a man of color as president of the United States of America. And some people today ask me whether the election of President Barack Obama is a fulfillment of Dr. King's dream. I said, no, it's just a down payment. We're not there yet. There's still too many people who have been left out and left behind.
So we've seen some noticeable change, but the resistance to change has been so strong, and the resistance to him as president has been so very strong. And so we know that blacks are disproportionately in the jails. 2.5 million Americans in prison, 55% are black. About 9 million are registered on marijuana, about 500,000 blacks a year. And so we are facing the impact of profiling, arrest, and incarceration, and that is kind of unfinished business.
The scale of the struggle somehow gets bigger every time progress is made. And we need to do kind of just the same amount and more again each time. The marches need to be bigger, more inclusive. The radical organizations need to be more radical. But I think that that there is a great potential to grow, but also that middle-class comfort might be the greatest enemy of progress in terms of racial equality.
Free at last, but not equal at last. And so while we're free to socialize, we can go to the movies together, and libraries together, and play ball together, the social interrelation barrier has basically come down, but the disparity gap has gotten wider. Too few have too much. Too many have virtually nothing. And the middle class is sinking because we are closing plants and exporting jobs. Guns in, drugs in, jobs out. So we have some unfinished business to do because the unemployment gap, blacks 3 or 4 times unemployed the rate of whites. The imprisoning gap, the lack of education gap, victims of home foreclosure gaps, those gaps must now be addressed. And right here in this country, we have freedom without equality. And you're not really free until you are, in fact, equal.